All right, I'm here with.
Spencer Badu.
We're in Toronto, Ontario at Spencer's studio. I wanted to kick things off asking, how are you? How you feel right now?
I feel really good. I feel really energized. It's a Friday. Was at the gym earlier. Breakfast, lunch, everything's good. Yeah, just working.
Chilling.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
So originally, like my parents are from Ghana, so I like to say I'm like more or less from Ghana, but was born in Brampton and lived between like Brampton and Toronto for majority of my life, and now I reside in Toronto. Yeah.
I wanted to kick things off in the interview and just go straight to the point and ask you where your original like fashion journey started.
I think it's hard to pinpoint. I think I was always like conscious of fashion since I was a kid. Like I think being more or less like confronted with like hip hop culture, I think like clothing and presentation is like a big part of that. So I think like ever since I was young, and also having like an older brother, like I was always aware of like name brands, whether it was like, you know, like Pele Pele, Nietzsche, LRG, you kind of name it, like, you know, I was more or less aware of it. And I think at a certain point, I went from more or less following to, you know, being attracted to like my own brands, or more or less having my own taste. So I would say that's like one level of it. And then I think like on a, you know, fashion level, quote unquote, I think like seeing like Jean Becker from like fashion television, just seeing her like run around like fashion weeks and going to different shows, interviewing designers. That was like more or less like my first introduction to like fashion with a capital F, if you will. And then the internet was definitely like a big part, you know, from just exploring, you know, past designers. And at the time, like I think that was probably when you would be able to see shows like right after they happened. So I think that was like, you know, I was definitely on like GQ, I think at the time. Before I was like going on Vogue, I was like going on GQ and just like eating it all up, you know. Yeah.
At what point did you take the jump and start pursuing fashion?
It's funny because like I've been making things since I was like a kid. I think it started with like we buy these like Avery packets of paper that you could like iron on like graphics onto a t-shirt. So that was like one step. In school we also used to like paint our t-shirts in like a graffiti style, and then like I remember wearing that to school with a couple of my friends, and people were like, what are those? Like I need those. And then I think like we went through like a stage of like airbrushing. I personally didn't airbrush, but I knew someone that knew how to airbrush, and I guess that was kind of like my business mind. So I'd like bring the idea to him and he would like execute. But yeah, I think like I was always making things, but yeah, I don't know. I think the first time I ever like actually thought it was possible to like, you know, have a business was when I started like traveling from Brampton to like downtown Toronto and like seeing, you know, like local brands, where there was like, you know, Ransom, Goodfoot, Dream Design, like all those kind of like, you know, early, you know, pioneers of like Toronto streetwear, if you will. And I was like, oh damn, like these are like people that are either like look like me or they don't seem like they're too far, you know, from my age. And I was like, oh, like if they can do it, then it's actually like possible. So
For context, where did you go to school and for what?
So funny enough, I went to school in Calgary for 2 years. I went to a technical school called Olds College, and I majored in fashion technology. So that's not fashion, apparel technology with a major in fashion, and that was more or less like a technical school. So I just learned more or less like the foundational skills, from like pattern drafting to sewing to like you name it, like Photoshop, Illustrator, dressmaking, tailoring, swimwear, knits and sportswear. Like just basically every semester you would have to make like a garment, and the garment was specific to like the type of technique or machines you were using. So if it was like like a tailoring class, you'd have to make like a suit by hand. If it was like a swimwear, and like so on and so forth. But yeah.
So starting from the graphic tees, selling those, when did the full brand Spencer Badu come to life?
So it's funny. I started the brand while I was still in school. I think that was like maybe 2014, 2013 is when I started to like make things and like just put my name on it. Like I just got some labels made and threw my name on these like things I were making that were like probably didn't fit well and probably weren't like constructed well. But like for me, I was like building a brand. And then in my first year, I applied for like a competition called Mercedes-Benz Startup, which was like a emerging designer competition where you would compete with like 4 other designers from across Canada with a chance to win like maybe $30,000 at the time it was. So I had applied and I got accepted into the competition. But one of the requirements was that you had to have like a business license or a business number. And I guess that was because like when they gave the check to the winner, like it would have to go towards a business. And then they're like, hey, like you got selected, but we just don't have like your business number. And I was like, give me one day. And I like ran to the registry and I like registered my company, and that was in like 2015. And yeah, I competed in the competition, didn't win, but then I went back to school. And then when I finished school, I basically moved back to Toronto and I just kind of hit the ground running. I literally forgot your question, but hopefully that.
When did it start? Like 2015?
Yeah, 2014, 2013 was when I was making stuff in like my room. 2015 is when I officially made it a business. And then I think 2016 or 17 was like when I finished school, or beginning of 2017 is like when I moved back to Toronto. And that's when like I moved into like, you know, TFI, and I was just like more or less like working. And here we are now.
For context, TFI was his previous studio.
Yeah, so it was called the Toronto Fashion Incubator. It was a shared studio space, about like 3,000 square feet, and there was room for about 10 designers. But while I was there, I think the max there was maybe like 5 or 6 designers in total. And I basically worked there from 2017 until 2022, and then here I'm in my own studio now. So. New space, yeah.
More private,
more responsibilities, higher rent, you know the vibes.
Yeah. So from starting the brand, when was your first time sending off a piece to the manufacturer?
It's funny, like I think I was making stuff in my room, and I was also like most people, like making or trying to make things in like anywhere. So like where there was like Asia or Portugal, but I think at the time the gateway was like Asia because it was just like easier to find manufacturers.
Of course, yeah.
So I was like doing stuff there, and then I was doing stuff in like Canada. My first time doing stuff in Canada was pretty exciting because I made like a pair of jeans from scratch, and that was really interesting because I made the pattern. I sourced the fabric, and then I basically like sent everything to at the time my friend Justin. He had a factory, and it was like really low minimum, so we could make a minimum of like 20 pairs of pants, which is like not a lot, but when you're a small designer, like to get rid of 20 pants is a lot. Like so I think for me that was like more or less like when I felt like I was actually producing something, because I was more hands-on. And anything that went wrong was more or less like on me, because like I made the pattern, I sourced the fabric, I gave him the zippers and all that stuff. So, and it was just really nice to see like it all come together, and then basically pay an invoice, and then I just had a box of 20 jeans, and I just, you know, it probably took me like a year or so to get rid of them. But yeah, that was kind of like the starting.
How far into the brand were you at that point?
I think that was like as soon as I moved back to Toronto. So while I was in Calgary, I was like talking to Justin back and forth, and I think I had made like a sample with him.
Yeah.
So basically, as soon as I came to Toronto, I had like so I guess like 2 years in, leaving school, or like a year after leaving school, is like when I basically made my first pair of like clothes with a manufacturer in Canada. Everything else I made before was like hats and stuff, but those were all made in like Asia. Yeah.
So from that process, when you first originally started the brand, how do you start off with an idea to a final release product?
I think it really changes from garment to garment. I think it really starts with like the inspiration and like what you're trying to say or what you're trying to make, and then it can come down to like the silhouette and like what fabrics you're going to use. But usually, for me at least, it starts with like inspiration or like, concept or idea. And then that gets broken down into like, you know, references, into like designs. And then for me, I love to like pattern draft. So I'll go to the drafting table and basically make the initial shape, try it on, like make it out of muslin, do a fitting, you know, make sure it's like what I'm looking for. And then I'd like make it out of like the real fabric. So ideally, like, you know, for me, the process has always been like doing development in-house, and you know, that's what we're trying to continue to keep, because there's like a magic that happens in that process. But yeah, usually it's like design or inspiration design and then drafting, and after drafting, for me, it's like sample making, and then like in this case, like, you know, at this moment we're going to you know, Paris every 6 months, and we take those samples to market, and then we come back and we just wait for like, you know, the orders or the interest, and then we make it. And then production's like a whole nother like beast, but production usually happens like while we're designing the next collection. So there's always like a overlap of things, or of seasons per se. Yeah.
So you've been in the business with your brand for 8 years?
Yeah. So officially 7 years, but yeah, we can say like 8 years, or like even like 9 years making clothes. Yeah.
What has been your biggest roadblock through Spencer Badu over time?
It's funny, like I think, as crazy as this sound, like I feel like more or less like I've been my biggest roadblock, and not in like a negative way. I think like for instance, like the brand's like self-funded, so there has been like, you know, restrictions that, you know, I have to deal with, but those restrictions also make the brand what it is, because, you know, we're working with what we have, which I'm like super proud that we're able to like, you know, continue to operate and come this far with like, you know, little to no like investment from, well, especially like from outside. But I think also, like, when I say myself, I think I dream big, but I think as I've, you know, lived and operated the business, I realized that I could like dream bigger, and every time I accomplish something, I'm just reminded that like the possibilities are endless. But I think besides that, like, you know, if we're not talking about myself, I think on an external level, the biggest like roadblock, I think, for me is just like, I hate to say it, but I think like being in a place like, you know, Canada, like I definitely love and appreciate it, but it's a really small market. It's a really small, like, you know, audience per se. And we don't really have like a fashion system like other countries. Like I think a lot of different countries have systems where emerging designers, or designers in general, can benefit from existing in those places. You know, there's editors, there's buyers, there's, you know, a bigger, you know, customer base, you know. But I feel like every designer in the city, they make the best of what they have. But I feel like, you know, that's why we basically get up and travel every 6 months, because yeah, I just never want to be the bitter Canadian, you know. So and the world's bigger than, you know, wherever you reside. So you just kind of have to like, you know, figure it out.
It's true. There's a New York Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week, but Toronto. We do have a Fashion Week, but it's nothing crazy. Yeah,
I think our Fashion Week is more like, it's more commercial. It's more like a party.
Yeah,
and I think it gives someone like a reason to go outside and to, you know, dress up, which is nice. But I think beyond that, there's like designers that have spent like the past 4, 5, or 6 months building a collection, and, you know, once they're done their show, it's like, for me at least, I like to think like, what comes out of that, you know? Are those people going to purchase the garments? Are the stores in the city going to place an order? Are the magazines, like, you know, the local magazines, going to talk about those designers? I personally haven't seen it that much, but I think, you know, you just kind of sometimes you just have to make noise somewhere else. Yeah, maybe one day. And I don't think like it's not like I don't think it's like it's final. I think it just takes time, you know. Toronto's a very like new city if we're comparing to like places like London and Paris and New York. Like, there's built-in history and tradition, where I think we're basically building and creating, you know, these traditions
right
we're
now as we
hopefully
speak.
yeah, as we speak. So hopefully designers of the future can benefit off of that, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I know like a part of your brand, one big thing you push for is like unisex clothing.
Yeah.
Your clothing is genderless, doesn't matter who wears it.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to explain your goal with the brand or your purpose when you started.
Yeah, so it's so funny. When I first started making clothes, I think at that time in like 2014, 2015, clothing was very like specific and like very gendered. So there was like women's fashion week and menswear fashion weeks, and it was very like, it was very distinct. Like women's wear was a lot of like dresses and very like colorful, and then like menswear shows were very like muted, and it was like a lot of tailoring, and there wasn't really like an in between. And I'd always find it weird that like, you know, let's say a famous person that was like a guy would go to like a women's wear show, and obviously he probably would go with his partner or he would just go by himself, but for me I was like, there's really nothing for them to take away from here, but like for them to just like look at it and appreciate it for what it is, which is like totally normal. But in my head I was like, oh, like it would be cool to have like, you know, clothing or like a fashion show where like everyone could come and they could like either leave with something or see something that they can more or less use.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the initial idea. And then, you know, just thinking about like history and clothing, and just like, especially on like the African like level, it's like, I don't think like the idea of like a jeans and like pants, like they probably weren't introduced to like, you know, a lot of these different countries like post like or before colonialism. Before that we were just kind of more or less like using like, you know, the fabric and the cloth that we were weaving in our different like towns.
Okay, yeah.
And that being said, like there's really no gender. Obviously one would cover themselves the way they wanted to, but you know, it wasn't really specific to gender. Like just like, you know, you can use cloth to wrap yourself, you can use cloth to make a garment. So I was just kind of thinking of more or less like on a deeper level, like clothing doesn't necessarily have a gender. Like obviously while I was in school I was kind of like trying to decode like, you know, size charts and figure out like the similarities and the differences between like a men's size chart and a women's size chart. And obviously our bodies are built different, but I think there's a lot more that we can do with garments together. So that's kind of like how it started. And I think when I first started I was like definitely out to like change the world.
Yeah.
But I think now like the idea of like gendered clothing is like, it's kind of archaic. Like obviously we still like shop in a men's and women's like I guess more or less like box, but I think people just wear what they want in this day and age. So
Definitely, that's the one thing I love about the brand. I think my friends can buy the same piece as their girl,
yeah,
but they pull it off in a completely different way,
and they can
just
share it,
crazy.
hopefully,
And they can share it,
yeah.
exactly. So I wanted to talk about, I've seen your pieces on the likes of ASAP, Trippy, Steph Curry. I wanted to talk about how you, like your process, how do you go from, how do you get in contact with them, how do you send it off, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think like for me when I first started making clothes, it was always like a iffy thing, like the idea of like, you know, celebrity. And obviously I engage with celebrity and I love celebrity. Like I listen to these musicians, I watch these athletes on TV.
Yeah.
But I do understand it's like a double-edged sword, you know, like if you depend solely on, you know, celebrities to validate your clothes, then they could, you know, make it or break it. So the way I kind of go about it is I just kind of interact with people that more or less appreciate the brand. Like I don't think I necessarily go out of my way to like beg people to wear their clothes or like try to force it onto people.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things, like, you know, gratefully, you know, they've kind of happened organically, whether it's through like relationships with stylists or direct relationships with like artists. And for me, the way I kind of go about it is like, I feel like what I'm doing is like could appeal to a lot of people, but I do understand that like at face value it might come off like niche. So when people like reach out to me and they seem like they're interested, usually I'll engage with them, you know, because it's like, for me, that's the ultimate goal, is to get people to wear the clothes. Like, if we're just making clothes and no one's wearing it, then we're doing like something wrong. And when someone that I appreciate, whether it's like, like an ASAP Rocky or a Young Thug or, whoever, and they're interested in it, like, I kind of feel like there is a mutual appreciation for what each other does, if that makes any sense. But yeah, the way I kind of go about it, or the way it's usually happened is like either, someone that is in the camp or someone that like works directly with these people will reach out, or the artists themselves will see it, or the person themselves will see it, and then it's more or less about kind of figuring out how we can bring value to whatever they're doing, whether that's like a tour or a show or just like the NBA finals. So I think anyone who's a designer knows that like people will like reach out to you, and we've had a lot of people reach out in the past, and we've tried a lot of like things in the past, but you never really know what's going to happen until like they actually wear it. So that's kind of been the whole, I guess, process. And we've really just seen, I guess, what people have worn and the things that people haven't worn. We'll never know, but it might be in like someone's closet. But yeah, that's kind of like how it's kind of come together over the time. It's just been like, hey, like, we really love what you're doing, we'd love to like work together. And then it's like, hey, like, how can I help? And then connect the dots and just see if we can like basically gift. Sometimes they buy, which is like even way better. But for me, it's just like an exchange of value, right? It's like I'm helping, like, I love to contribute to what someone is doing, especially if it's someone like I'm fond of. And then can't deny the fact that these people have like huge audiences, and that also brings a lot of attention to what we're doing, right? So I think it's just an exchange of value at the end of the day.
I love to see the celebrity supporting, especially like in places where I've seen them so many times, like on stage or behind, like coming off the NBA finals. It's crazy to see like seeing Trippie at Rolling Loud or something wearing your pieces, and it's like, it's crazy to me.
It's crazy to me. I think when it happens, I definitely go through a moment where I'm like, oh shit, and I kind of like lose it. And then like, I hate to say it, but I'm very like, it's very like short-lived. But I appreciate it for what it is in the moment. I jump, I laugh, I scream, I like send texts or whatever, and then after 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, back to work. Like, but that's just like me, I guess.
I wanted to talk about your design process a little bit more, talking about like what aspects of life do you pull inspiration from, whether it be music, art, culture, it doesn't matter.
I think like for me ultimately what we're trying to do is like create like a uniform, and I think like the connotation of a uniform can more or less become like boring or make people think of like everyone looking the same, and for us, like, that's not what we're trying to do. I think for me, it's like I like to create obviously pieces that are like minimal and like directional and like functional, but I want it to be like loaded with like references and detail and just ideas in general. So for me, like, inspiration kind of comes from everywhere. Obviously the main kind of like things are like music and culture and like history, but also just like walking down the street, I might see like someone at like work, or just see someone like running an errand, and I might see something that catches my eye and just be like, okay, bet, like, I understand like what's going on. But then I might see something that's like designed very badly, or I might see someone like struggling because of like, for instance, something they're wearing, or something around them, and then just kind of like think about how to improve or incorporate, because ultimately I feel like design is like problem solving. But so ultimately it's like, how do you take something as simple as like a cargo pant, but then like load it with like intention and ideas and culture, and then kind of like present it as like your own. It's funny because like we're in a studio and we're creating all these ideas, but then I think we're also aware that like it's hard to make anything original these days. I think it's really about like it's really about recontextualizing things around us, and more or less, for me at least, it's about having more personal references and references that are specific to myself, just so, you know, at the end of the day, it's like no one could ever say that these things like look similar to other people, because it's like, you know, like I might have been inspired by like something, you know, I saw when I was a kid, or like, you know, maybe my mom's favorite color, or like my mom's like, you know, jacket, you know. It's just like all these like different things. But yeah, that's kind of the goal, like create a uniform, but not just like very like yeah, just not like a boring, you know, structured jacket. It's like how do you make this shit interesting and useful, right? So
I noticed that a lot of people, the people who are really succeeding are realizing that nothing's original anymore. Everything's been done. You have to like recontextualize, redesign with intent.
Yeah.
Instead of like just take classic cut of cargo pants and slap your logo on it.
Yeah. I think like there's obviously brands that will do that and will continue to do that. And I think like at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to like what your audience or your customer wants. Like some people just want, you know, a regular cargo pant that might just have like a new logo on it. There's brands that, you know, obviously I won't call any names, but there's brands that fill that void for like, you know, mass consumers that just want like more or less like something that they've seen in the past or something that's trendy, but just like, you know, made in a new fabric and a new color. And then there's, you know, other customers that are looking to be challenged and inspired. But I think the advantage, what I've realized, you know, the advantage that any designer has is like when they start to become more like vulnerable and their references are a bit more like personal and it's more specific to them. Because at that point you're just like you're in a flow and you're just like handwriting, you know, instead of like trying to copy something that's popular. Because what ends up happening is everything just looks like, you know, derivative of like everything else around us. It's kind of like music. I think we can tell when like we're in a space where like, for instance, like Cardi or Uzi or whoever is like the most, for instance, like popular rapper, because everyone starts to sound like them, right? So whether if it's like Balenciaga or Louis Vuitton or like Yeezy, you know, if those are like the top brands, I think we see it, you know, from other brands that, you know, they kind of just hop on that wave. But if you play the long game, you can just like create instead of trying to like compete with whatever's going on, you know. So
agreed. I'm curious to know, what are your favorite pieces you made, or some of the favorite pieces you wear on the daily that you just revisit?
Yeah, I think it starts with like the basic stuff. So I think like for instance, like my t-shirt, with logos or without, I think it's just something that I'll like probably wear for the rest of my life. I think for me, like the cut and the fit and just like the details, I think at this point has become like a staple. And then like my sweatpants, I feel like I have a few pants that I kind of cycle through. So like my track pants, my cargo chinos, and then like my like more like wide leg sweatpants. Like I kind of go through those three all the time. I used to have these like cargo pants that I would like wear religiously, but they don't like fit me anymore. But yeah, I think like those things for me, like I'm like, you know, I have my own uniform per se, but I kind of just keep it more simple. But yeah, I would say those, and then just kind of like anything that's been like functional and kind of stood the test of time. Like I see like my vest kind of being one of those pieces, just because it kind of like, it basically has all the elements of the brand. And I think like the biggest one is just how functional it is. And I think like I remember seeing like Dylan in Paris like on a bike, and at first I didn't know it was like him. And I was on a bike too, and he was just like doing this thing, and I was like, oh shit, like someone's wearing my vest. And he just looked like, obviously he looked so cool, but it just looked like he didn't have like a bunch of shit on him. And I was like, bet, like that's the goal. And he was just like literally on a bike, like headphones on, like just going through like the bicycle lane in Paris. And then like I literally tried to wave to him, but he was just like, he did not see me. But yeah, when I see stuff like that, I'm just kind of like, yeah, like, you know, it's
the intent you created with is actually coming to life.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and for me, that's like ultimately like the most fulfilling part of all of this stuff is like, I think seeing people wearing it, whether it's like in person or just like through online, because you know, we're actually gonna try to start to get into like marketing, but the fact of the matter is that like we haven't really spent $1 on like, you know, marketing, you know, like I think this year we did like the posters, but we don't do any like we don't do any like ads or campaigns like online. So people that are like really interacting with the brand, it's either they know me or they heard of the brand or they just saw the garment and they're like, oh, this is sick, like let me see what's going on. And sidebar, not to like name drop, but I remember when I was in Paris, I saw someone sent me a photo of like Ricky Thompson wearing like a full fit to like the Rick Owens show, and I had never like I think we've like probably DM'd a couple times, but I didn't send him the garments and I didn't send it to a stylist, so
it's amazing.
So he had bought it himself, so that was like really cool to see. And then I literally bumped into him at like the GQ party, and I was just like, I just basically introduced myself, and he's very animated and like whatever, but he was like excited to see me, and he gave me a lot of like good words. But when I see things like that happen, I'm like, okay, cool, like if this is what's happening without any like budget or whatever behind it, like what would happen or what could happen if we like start to like market the brand and try to like expose it to like a wider audience.
I love to see it.
Yeah.
What can we expect? What can I expect to see from you coming up? Whether it be like events you're doing or even the next collection.
Yeah, it's funny. Like events, we're trying to get into something more like permanent.
Yeah.
Like I think like in the past we've had like this thing called like Universe, where it's like more or less like a party series. And I think the last time we did one was 2019, like before the pandemic. And really after the pandemic, we haven't really done like an official party besides like launches and like whatever of like the pop-up shop, for instance. So I think stuff like that, just kind of like events that like more or less like continue to foster community, but then also gives like a platform to like other people, because like at the end of the day, it's like we make clothes, not to say that we don't have any like business like throwing a party, but throwing parties and events allows us to continue to foster our community. Obviously people that are already within the community, and then there's new people that are going to kind of like join and interact with us. But everyone that we meet, like they do their own thing. They might have their own art practice. They might be musicians, artists, fashion designers, photographers, and it's like gives them a platform to potentially collaborate with them, or just like give them a platform to show their work. So I think for me, it's like events is a way to like use the brand as like a platform just for other people to use. Like if we think about like our for instance like our campaign and photography, like I guess formula, like there's just a lot of people that we work with, and for me, I always try to just work with people that are like younger than me, and that I feel like offer a different perspective, instead of just kind of like relying on like the seasoned like OG that everyone's using. Like obviously I'd love to, but I don't know, I just feel like the kids just have like a new perspective that is like needed, and a lot of the times people just don't want to take that shot. And obviously, like you live and you learn. Some shoots will be better than others, but it's the risk you take, because ultimately it's like those people are going to be the next big thing. So you might as well like invest in them and give them a platform. So stuff like that. And then I think like in terms of the brand, like, we just came back from Portugal, and we got exposed to like a lot of different factories, and I think now I'm like just starting to see that there's just so many different possibilities. So I think like that is just kind of like continuing to like step things up is kind of like what we're looking for. But I think we're in this phase now where I feel like the brand is kind of coming into like its own. So I think like going forward, like we just want to present the brand as like a whole complete brand, so everything down to like tags, packaging, boxes, shopping bags, like every single piece of the brand, I want it to just feel like complete, because I feel like we're kind of like slowly past this like emerging stage, and I feel like we have like now a clear brand voice, and we have a very distinct like point of view, so now it's just about doubling down on those things and making sure everything that we do reinforces those elements or ideas.
Let's talk what's up with 010, 011. What can we expect with those collections?
So it's funny. So the 10th collection is dropping like more or less in like a month or so. So we're in production for that now. So that collection was shot maybe last year. Funny enough, we got like Whack and Mo to do the styling for that. And yeah, that's like funny. I remember just reaching out to them and being like, yo, like, I don't know if you guys have ever styled before, but like my gut was like, yo, like these two can do justice. So they already did it. Like they already did the styling. Dion shot the lookbook, and that should be coming out soon. We're doing production for that now, and that should be done like within the next like couple weeks. And obviously that will go out to like our wholesale partners. And then for us, like we're also updating the website, because we're like, we see our website as also like a platform to just continue to grow the brand. So a few new like updates coming to the website soon. And then the 11th collection is what we showed in Paris in June. And yeah, at the moment the feedback's been good. We've tried a few new things like glasses. We got into like more knits. Still doing like the graphic story with Mike Sunday. And yeah, just like exploring new ideas and kind of going deeper into like, for me at least, like my African culture, and kind of telling more or less my perspective of those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I'm excited, obviously, with the feature and how things are going. And yeah, I think like maybe next month we'll probably start to like sketch and design the 12th collection, and then ideally back to Paris in January. I also want to go to London if I can this year. I haven't been in a while. Obviously, you guys are just there. I haven't been there in a while, and I also see London as like a location that the brand could possibly just do a lot in. So I'm looking at
London supports everything.
Literally, and
I love it.
Yeah, London just has like a system that is built to support emerging and young creatives. So yeah, like we'll see, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, at the moment, like just trying to more or less make sense of it all.
Well, I'm excited to see you expand, grow. Excited to see everything that comes out.
Yeah, no, appreciate it.
I want to move on to like my favorite question. I think the most important question is what's your advice to an emerging designer that's just starting out?
I'm like, what do I say without coming off like corny and like, I want to give something that's like useful, and I think I already said it before, but I think it's like two things. I think like at the end of the day, like you just have to like work and just like put your head down and like I don't know, I don't expect everyone to like work as much as I did like when I first started this, but I think like if you want these things to come to life and you don't want to leave anything on the table, it's just about like just like shut up, put your head down and work, and eventually, for better or for worse, like you'll be able to like have something to show for it. I think on a design level, because I think that's like also like a super important part of like building a brand. I think this day and age, there's just like so much out there. I think your best bet is just to like figure out, one, what you're trying to say, and two, like who you are. I think like those two will definitely inform a lot of what you're trying to do. I think if it's like a iteration of something that already exists, I think it's like teach their own. Who am I to say like if it will be successful or not? But I think like I personally not sure if it would be. But yeah, like know what you're trying to say and like who you're talking to and what statement you're trying to make. And then two, like know who you are, and once you know who you are, it's like dig deep into that. Like who are you? Where are you from? Like, if you're Canadian and your parents are Canadian, and like it's like dig into that. Like what does that look like? If you're like an architect or a photographer and you want to go into like design, it's like what does a fashion brand look like from a photographer? And yeah, I just kind of like don't be afraid to present something new, because like in the moment it might be like comfortable doing something that is easily digestible and something that's like familiar, but in the long term, like you probably won't stand the test of time. So like just like take the risk and be vulnerable and just like, you know, tell your story ultimately. Don't try to tell a story, like just tell your story.
Love that.
Yeah.
I wanted to also step outside of the brand, talk about more you personally.
Yeah.
You spoke before, you're from Brampton, moved to Toronto.
Yeah.
Let's start. What are your favorite spots to eat, or where did you go hang out as a kid in Brampton?
As a kid in Brampton, Bramley City Center was the mecca of like, because it's just like, it's a mall, right? So there's just like so much to do there. It's totally different, and it's been like renovated over the years, and it's become this like its own like kind of monster, because it's like probably 3 times the size from when I lived there as a kid. But yeah, like I think the mall for sure. Like the food court was a place where you would basically see your friends, you know, see, you know, anything. Like you would basically bump into like people you didn't know, people you did know, you know. You'd make a lot of friends. Those were kind of like, or that was one of the places that I kind of hung out a lot as a kid. And I just spent a lot of time in like the food court. And then there's another store, I think it was called like London Underground. My friend Mo, he was also like one of the people that like exposed me to clothing, because he had his own clothing store. And I was like maybe like 12, 11, like just going to this guy's store. And I remember like we got to a point where we begged him to like be able to like clean his store, and he would give us like free clothes for like cleaning his store. So we'd like sweep and mop the store. And I remember he gave me like an LRG jacket, which I was like geeked out about. And then his like no names, but his one of the people in the mall were like, you gave that guy like a jacket for like cleaning? Like, she's like, what are you doing? Like, guess she probably just wanted him to give us like $10, but he messed with us. So shout out to Mo from London Underground and Bramley City Center. I don't know if he's still there. And then the library, like growing up, I didn't have like a computer or internet, so the library was kind of like where I got my first introduction to like YouTube, to just like the internet in general. And we would, you know, there was 2 ways you can go about it. You can get like a library card and use like the computer for an hour at a time, or you can like have on the first floor there'd be like a 15-minute computers where you can just like, you know, use a computer for 15 minutes to like send an email. But for us, yeah, we'd be abusing like YouTube and MSN. But yeah, for sure, I'd say that. I'm trying to think of like, yeah, somewhere else. Yeah, and then like, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in was called like Knightsbridge, so spent a lot of time there. The basketball court, the front of the building. Yeah, just doing like kid shit. But those are like, for me, especially like on a nostalgic level, those places in Brampton are definitely
most memorable,
and also the most influential. Like I learned so much in all 3 of those areas, you know. Yeah.
What about let's talk about time in Toronto. Favorite place to eat in Toronto, favorite place to chill, and then I know you don't go out much.
Yeah, I don't go out much.
Your favorite venue, maybe.
Yeah, I think like the studio is like, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but no, the studio for sure. Like I'm here like religiously. As say what you will, but like Jerk King for me is like, I eat that shit religiously. The price has definitely gone up from like, you know, from when I started buying food there, but I get it, inflation is real. But yeah, so Jerk King is a place that I go to religiously. For food, I don't know if there's any other places that I would, you know, think of that I go to like as much as I do. But
beyond King Slice?
Yeah, I don't go to King Slice that much. I don't know, like I think for me, like at the end of the day, it's like I just need like the bang for my buck, and like buying a huge slice of pizza, I'm just kind of like, bruh, when I can get like a meal and potentially like, you know, when it gets shaky, like split that fucking small or medium jerk into like 2 meals, like yeah, I think like that's like, you know, it's kind of hard to beat that one. But
what about favorite venue when you go to a party?
Favorite venue? What is a favorite venue? I'm trying to think of like a place. What are we talking, like concerts and stuff, or like shows or parties? Parties.
If you can think of like anything Cass has hosted.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like any
venue.
time like Kazim's hosted a party and I was like, you know, this space is fire. I think I don't know, like I think Libertine's cool. Like obviously there's like pros and cons to like every space, but I think I like just like the, I don't know.
Do you like the Drake?
Yeah, so we've had a party at the Drake, and the Drake is good, for sure. Yeah, the Drake is definitely a good spot. Drake over Libertine, I think, like in terms of like acoustic space, like overall design. I think like Drake for sure is like a good place. I'm trying to think like the last party I went to, and if I was like, cause yeah, I feel like I've been to like, I went to Kazim's party when he first came back at like AM PM. And then I also went to Libertine when my homie Tommy Gold and like Miles were doing an event. But yeah, but it also makes me realize that there's not a lot of like spaces in Toronto.
Yeah, I feel like Toronto's very much follow who you want to see.
Exactly, but I also feel like there's probably like 3 or maybe 4. Like I'm trying to think of like where like one would go out at night. Like it would either be Apartment, Libertine, or AM PM.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
say AM PM.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like where else one would go. Like the rest would be like maybe like a bar or like a restaurant type situation. But yeah, I don't really club much. But we also appreciate like a DIY, like rave.
Yeah,
I think those are also cool.
Love that. Well, thank you for sitting down, having a conversation with me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the brand grow, where you take it.
Same with you. I'm excited to see like where you take this. I think like, you know, before you were behind the camera, we didn't know what you look like, and now you're like interviewing man. So I'm excited to see where you take it.
Appreciate it. Thank you, bro.
Bro, appreciate you always. Jeez.